what we'll talk about now is the whole business of how to pick a partner, or in a sense what we call marriage prediction. How can you, in a sense, predict what will make a good marriage? Now, there are some people who say, don't even try to pick a good partner. Just let it happen. And I think that's really very wrong. I believe the Lord has given us brains to use, understanding to use, and you should not disregard a good understanding of the topic and making intelligent decisions on the basis of your understanding. Now, I understand all of you are single, is that right? Okay. Are you in the process of going with someone, or is that a no-no while you're going to school, or that's a no-no? Okay, so I can't ask you that question. Well, all right. In other words, yes, I understand. I understand. But officially, you're not going with anyone. Okay. As you will remember from our previous lecture, I said that marriage was important. It's a universal phenomenon. We all have needs, and the most common method of meeting those needs are within marriage, and that happens in every society all over the world. And it seems to me that who you marry is of extreme importance, and I would say that the second most important decision you'll make in your life, the first one is whether to follow Jesus Christ or not, and the second one is who are you going to marry. Okay? It's really a decision that is of cardinal importance. It is very, very important. And thirdly, it seems to me that it is socially important because your future life as an officer will be to a considerable extent influenced by the spouse you have. You can sit down and talk to any officer. You'll find out that, yes, I did very well in this job, particularly because of my wife or my husband, or we had a tough time there because my husband was sickly or whatever. But it really is important. When you get married, it is a team, and who you play with will to a great extent influence the kind of work that you're doing. So it seems to me that you should really take care in picking a partner. And just as a little aside advice, don't pick the second-hand or second-rate spouse. Don't take someone that you are not too happy about. That really is a poor choice to make. As I told you before, I'm a marriage counselor, and a lot of the problems I deal with are problems of second-choice spouses. Okay? People who said, well, maybe we can kind of try, and it seemingly doesn't work out too well. Okay, how do you pick a right partner? The first thing to my mind is that as a Christian, you pray about it. You ask for guidance, you ask for help, you explain to the Lord that it is important to you, and you spend some time in prayer in that regard. The second thing has to do with the whole business of obedience. You know as well as I know that it is only when we are obedient that God, so to speak, can work with us. So it's very important that we are obedient and walking in the Spirit. Okay? Thirdly, you use your head. That is, you do some thinking. And you ask some intelligent questions. And fourthly, you get yourself some information in regards to marriage, and what it's about, and what kind of a person this person is. And fifthly, don't rush. Okay? Marriage should really not be rushed into. Now, we have lots of knowledge available in regards to marriage prediction. And to my mind, and to my understanding, it really could have rather revolutionary results if this knowledge was disseminated. There would be fewer maladjusted families, fewer maladjusted children, etc. Unfortunately, it seems no one is particularly interested in this, and no one particularly wants to have this information. So hopefully you're a different type of young people, and you want this information, and so I'll give you this. Okay, now I list for you 14 areas of research that we have, so to speak, located, where we can give you intelligent information in regards to who to marry and who to not marry. The first area is that of childhood experience. It is favorable if your spouse comes from a family where they had a reasonably happy childhood, they had happily married parents, and where the children had no major conflicts with the parents, and where parental discipline was firm and consistent, but not harsh. Okay? Now this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, but it's also backed up by research. In other words, if a kid was brought up in a family, and he learned that the family was a nice place to be in, they would look after you, care for you, and where there weren't all kinds of disciplinary and authority problems all the time, then when you meet that kind of a person, they will say, yes, I like marriage, and I enjoy being in a family, and they'll fall into it very nicely. Okay? So similarly, if you find a person that had lack of parental acceptance, if they have preference one parent over the other, or they were very unhappy in their marriage, then you know that there are some problems, and it is not favorable in terms of marriage. Now let me explain. It doesn't mean that you can't marry that person. It just means you've got to do a lot more work. Okay? You can, if you want to, marry a Salvationist from, I don't know, Indonesia, who was brought up there. But when you get married, you'll find out you've got a lot of problems. Okay? And you'll have a lot of work to do. You can't even agree on whether to eat rice or potatoes. And you have to talk about that and come to some kind of a compromise. You have to come to compromise in regards to clothing, in regards to manners, in regards to a million things. So it isn't that you can't marry an Indonesian spouse. It just means that you've got to work a lot harder. Okay? All right. So that childhood experience area is important. And check that out. What kind of a home did you come from? Or even better, go and take a look. Meet mom and dad. Keep in mind, as a matter of fact, that if you go and visit his mom and dad, his dad is what your spouse is going to be like in 20 years. Okay? That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yes. No. No. People don't want to agree to that. That's true. But if things go as expected, that is what will normally happen. It may not happen if you say, I do not want to be like that, and you set up a program to be different, and then you work on it. But if you just slide along and do what comes naturally, you will be like your father or your mother in another 20 years. Okay? Now, if you, as I said, if you're aware that I got to do something and you do something, then you can become different. But we are, in fact, in a sense, programmed within the family. Okay? We are told what to do, what not to do, what is good, what is bad, what's indifferent, and we are programmed. And in TA language, transactional analysis language, we have what we call parent tapes. The tapes that play in our head and say this is good, that's bad, and we can't get away from those. Let me give you an example. My father is a work addict. He really is a work addict. He could not sit down and relax and take it easy. And so, whenever I sat down, my father would come along and says, "What are you doing? You're sitting there doing nothing." And, I would get up and I said, oh yeah, that's right. And I start doing something. I was always supposed to help my father fix this, fix that, paint this, and, I can't stay in houses. I never wanted to have a house until now, because of my dislike for all the work I did at home. Anyway, now I have it firmly implanted in my mind that you must work. Okay? My father died working. What I got from mother was, you must help people. Okay? She brainwashed me with that. She was a great Christian in the family, and she said, you must help people. You must help people. And so I go out, and I do two things. I help people, and I work myself to death doing it. Okay? Now, I was not aware of those parent tapes in my head. I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be like father, and I'm not going to be like mother. But the fact of the matter is that I am exactly what mother and father programmed me to be. Inadvertently. They didn't know they were doing it. They just did it. And I've had a terrible time looking at this parent tape in my head that says you must work. And now I can even take holidays without getting upset. In olden days, I would simply have to get myself sick so that I could go home and stay at home and not feel guilty. Now I can actually take a day off at home and not fall apart. That it's okay. I didn't hear father's voice in the head saying, what are you doing? Sitting there doing nothing. So we are programmed to be like parents unless we sit down and say, no, I don't want to be like that. I am going to be different. And then set up a program. But now I have worked hard on not being a work addict for the last 3 years, and I'm just... previously, I was a severely addicted workaholic. I am now just mildly, and eventually, in another 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be a cured one. That's my goal. But that comes hard. I even agree to come here and lecture, all day through without much stop. And if I wasn't so work addicted, I'd say, hold it. How about if you just take the morning and I'll take the afternoon off? But I agree to that. Okay, so we are programmed from the past. Now, the second important area is that of early sex information. One of the things we know is that if people were given a reasonably good orientation to sexual matters, then as they grow up, they can function sexually in an adequate manner. If they were brought up in a home where sexual information was not given to them, and it was obtained from other children and from magazines, etc., then that's not so favorable. And we have some people who are, in a sense, sexual cripples. They simply cannot function adequately sexually. They were brought up in homes where they were programmed with garbage information, all kinds of crazy stuff in regards to sex. And that really becomes a problem. So it is important. A third area is the duration of the courtship. And maybe let me ask you, what do you think is the important thing about the duration of the courtship? What's important about that? Any idea? Okay. So is it good to have a short one or a long one? That's true. How long should a courtship be? At least? At least 6 months. You read my talk. Pardon? Yes. Okay. At least 6 months. Anything shorter than 6 months just isn't acceptable. Most people should really know each other for 12 months before they really enter into an agreement to marry. And you should have an opportunity to get to know the person. You should have an opportunity to do leisure time activities together, but familistic activities, that is, that are home-oriented, church, and doing things together. And if you can do that, then it's favorable. If the courtship is too short, if the partners cannot confide in one another, in other words, you can't tell your partner everything, and if you feel strongly disturbed by beliefs or attitudes of the other person, then that's unfavorable. And you really have a handicap if you're going to get married to that person. So, courtship is basically a period of time where you can get close to another person and get to really know them and understand them and see, in a sense, whether you can actually live together. It is, so to speak, a trial period where you have an opportunity to be very close to another person. Okay. Very often, by the way, during this trying out period of courtship, difficulties are glossed over by people because they say, oh, well, we love one another and we don't worry about it. Don't gloss anything over. Deal with it. If there are differences in attitudes in regards to the Salvation Army, or let's say in regards to the doctrines of the Salvation Army, don't gloss it over. Deal with it. Get it out in the open. It is important. Okay. A fourth area is the age at marriage. Might not be relevant to you, but the male should be at least 21 and the girls should be at least 19 and preferably have high school education. In other words, the incidence of marriage breakdown and marriage trouble is much larger when the male is under 21, the female is under 19, and they have public school education only. Much higher. As a matter of fact, the incidence of marriage breakdown with teenage marriages is phenomenal. Anyone who gets, if two people get married at 16, there is a kind of a 90% chance that they're not going to make it. That's how bad it is. So people should simply not get married that early. So hang in there. Don't get married too early. How old are most of you, by the way? Are you all over? Pretty well spread. Are there anyone 19 or under? Not anymore. Okay. And all the males, you are 21 or over? No, 20. Okay, so don't get married yet. Take your time. Probably the ideal time, if you could speak about that, would be for male around 26, 25, 26, and a woman around, about the same age, maybe a little bit younger. The reason why we say a little bit younger isn't because of any derogatory things about women. It is simply that women tend to be more mature in those early years, so they are actually, in other words, a 19-year-old girl is as mature as a 21-year-old male. Okay, that's what we mean by it. Women, as a rule, mature quicker and do better in that whole social area. Okay. A fifth aspect is premarital sex. It is important that both partners have a healthy interest in sexual matters. But we know that not having sexual intercourse before marriage is on a positive side. That is, it usually is an indication that the marriage is going to work out. One of the surprising things we found was there was a huge study just done a few years ago, and the women with the best sexual adjustment were women who had no premarital sexual intercourse. And a lot of people were upset about that. That is on the other side of the fence, and I was very happy. This is very much so for women, but probably less so for males. In other words, previous premarital sexual intercourse is less important for the males. Okay. The sixth thing is the whole marriage motivation area. It's favorable to want marriage for reasons that include soundly based love feelings. Okay? And by soundly based love feelings, I mean feelings of genuinely loving, respecting, wanting to care for someone else. It isn't an escape away from family or a mad wish to be loved by someone or some kind of terrific need to have some esteem and have someone always say, "Aren't you wonderful? You are a terrific person," etc. In other words, they're soundly based love feelings. There's some desire to look after, to care for, to nurture, etc. A strong desire for sexual satisfaction, we mentioned that before, but it also comes in here, and a wish to have children. Normally, people want to have children, although that's starting to change now. There are a lot of young people who don't want to have children. But normally, for someone, it's favorable if the person wants to have children. And it's unfavorable if you sense that the other party really wants to get married because they are fleeing from a sense of loneliness, or they want to escape from the home, or they want to get away from an overpowering mother or father or whatever. Those are really not good indications of predicting marriage success. For example, loneliness is a very common cause for some people wanting to get married. It's a bad reason to get married, to get married for. It simply isn't very good. This happens amongst missionaries, for example, out in the field, that a woman might get very lonely out there. And so she decides to marry someone that is really second choice, maybe even third choice, and hopes that this is going to resolve feelings of loneliness. And it really doesn't. It really doesn't. There are much better ways of dealing with loneliness. By the way, maybe in terms of loneliness, I should point out to you that there is a difference between aloneness and loneliness. A feeling of aloneness is normal when you don't have people around you. Loneliness is really something different. It is, in a sense, a fear of loving. It is an inability to get closely involved with someone else. It is an inability to simply be intimate. And therefore, when you have people who are very lonely, to put them into a group usually is no solution. When people are lonely, they, in a sense, need to be re-educated and reprogrammed in terms of ability to relate. But when someone is simply alone, and they feel bad about being alone, then putting them into the group, of course, is going to help them out. So just keep in mind that loneliness is a deeper thing than just feeling alone. Okay. The conventionality area. Generally speaking, it is better to marry a reasonably conventional person. Okay? Now, it might be okay to marry someone who is very unconventional, but you're going to have some problems and some difficulties. And the easiest people to live with are the reasonably conventional people like you and me. Okay? Pardon? You're not conventional. Oh, I see. Well, we are all reasonably conventional. But there are some people who really believe in way out things. They dress very strangely. I hit a sore spot, did I? Right. Yes, I'm not uptight. Okay, but it's easier to live with a person that is reasonably conventional. it doesn't mean stodgy, but someone who holds normal expectations of what to do, etc. Also, by the way, it is better if, and this is part of this conventional area, it's better if you meet the person at home or in a similar respectable place. And you'll be happy to know that meeting a partner at church is a very good indication. And it's a great place to meet someone, yes? Or here at the college. I see. Well, as a matter of fact, are there a lot of cadets that get married after college that have met here? Only men. But are there a lot of men who... I see. What is the number? Like, is that half of them or... No, a third of them? Not even that. So 20%, something like that. Okay. And they have actually met their spouses in college and get married afterwards. Okay. Sure. But that is generally a good indication of marriage, that you marry another person quite like you, that you met at college, and you're not going to have a great deal of trouble living together. You will have similar beliefs, go to the same church, the core, etc. No? Okay. Unfavorable, and you might think that these are just value judgments or not. There's some research to back up all this. Unfavorable is an initial meeting which takes place via a pickup route. In other words, a quick kind of pickup in some dance hall or some such place. That really is rather unfavorable. And as I said, I'm not talking about the values now, I'm talking about research. Okay. The sociability area is another one. It's favorable on the average to have several friends of both sexes. And it's also favorable to belong to one or more organizations. And church membership, too, is also very favorable. Okay, let's look at this. If the person you're going to marry has several friends, let's say 3 or 4 or 5 friends, that is very good, because it indicates what? What does it indicate? That they're sociable, they know how to relate to people, and other people can live with them and get along with them, which is important. If the person you are about to marry has no friends, you really ought to say to yourself, that's very interesting. Now, that you wouldn't say that. I would say that. That's my stock and trade phrase. That's interesting. But you should say to yourself, I'm not so sure I'm all that happy about that. How come he or she has no friends? It may be that they do not know how to relate to people. And if they don't know how to relate to other people, they're not going to learn to relate to you. Or if they do, it is going to be a slow process. Okay? So therefore it's important to know how many friends your friend has. Okay. It's also favorable to belong to one or more organizations, simply indicating again that they are involved with social organizations and that they're involved with a lot of people. And as I mentioned, church membership. I say, without flinching to anyone that I meet, the only place to go to find a spouse is a good church. And that's where you find the best people to marry. And I really believe that. And if people say, look, I don't know where to find someone, I say go to a good church or a core. If you belong to a small core and there are not too many girls or fellows around there, I say look to parents, give them permission to go to, North Toronto or Etobicoke or one of the big ones where they can meet young people and someone suitable to marry. And I think that's important. Okay. So a tendency to avoid involvement with other people is an unfavorable factor. And if there's an absence of meaningful friendship and dislike of activities where other people participate closely, then consider that. Also unfavorable is a tendency to be critical of others, to resort frequently to daydreams and fantasies. In other words, people who don't relate well very often get involved in daydreaming and fantasies. That's not necessarily wrong if you just do a little bit of it, but if you do a great deal of it to avoid meaningful relationships, then that's bad. In terms of personality areas, the ninth area, it's favorable if one can assume responsibility, make decisions, and stand up for one's beliefs. Okay? So, if you can assume responsibility, in other words, you can assign a responsibility to that person, and they will carry it out. If they can make decisions, decision-making implies some measure of maturity. And if they can stand up for their beliefs, in other words, they don't cave in immediately, but they can say, yes, this is what I believe. And also if they're able to lead without being dominating and to be willing to yield when shown to be wrong. Okay? Also favorable are awareness of the feelings and opinions of others, slowness to anger, how do you like that? Quickness in getting over it, a sense of humor and perspective, and a cheerful, optimistic outlook on life. Where do you find fellows like that? No, they're not making them anymore. No. Boy, there's a disillusioned lady over here. It's that tough, is it? Okay, but that's the kind of a fellow that would be a good mate, or a kind of a girl that would be a very good mate. Unfavorable are frequent feelings of remorse and regret, extreme worrisomeness, difficulty in adapting to new situations, a strong inclination to show emotion, an obsessive-compulsive personality, and a desire to be of the opposite sex. Okay? You know what an obsessive-compulsive personality is? It's like a neat freak. You know, neat, orderly, everything just right. Everything's laid out, and I'm organized, and I know exactly where everything is, and I don't want any opposition, and I want you to do exactly what I tell you to do, and I get very upset when my plans fall apart. And I, generally speaking, can't have fun. That's an obsessive, compulsive personality. And they're very hard to be married to. Very hard. Don't marry one of those. Stay away from neat freaks. Okay. So the favorable traits in this personality area seems to have to do with well-being in general, and the unfavorable tends to be found in people struggling with problems of emotional adjustment. So in other words, emotional good health seems to make for a good spouse. The same for anything else. Emotional good health usually goes with being a good Salvation Army officer, with being a good missionary, with being a good anything that you do. So emotional well-being is important. And some of this, you don't have to be a shrink to be able to pick this up. You can look at people yourself, and you can have a fairly good idea of how well adjusted they are. Okay? Just using those criteria I said. If you're going to make a really quickie assessment of how well adjusted someone is, what would you say? What would you do? What would be the first thing? Pardon? Are they moody? Okay. That's a bad one. But let's just take some good ones. What area? Or some areas. Okay. What would that tell you? Okay. Well, it could be. I'm not so sure that it would be terribly important, but maybe it could be. Yeah? Okay. In other words, that they have opinions, but they can listen to other people's opinions. It's a good one. Embarrassing company. Could you elaborate? In their company. Okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. A very simple one. We mentioned here previously. How many friends do you have? Okay? It's very simple. It's just very simple. How many friends do you have? If you can hang around with a few friends, and all those friends are reasonably sane, then that's a very good indication of you being a healthy person. Yeah. Reasonably close friends. Reasonably close friends. I'm not talking about acquaintances, but friends where you actually talk about meaningful stuff. Okay. That's one thing. Friends. What's another one? Very simple. Very simple. Okay. Those are personality characteristics. But just as an area, the whole business of work. Okay? How do they work? Are they responsible? Do they carry out their jobs? Do they hang on to the job for a reasonable length of time? That will tell you a great deal about the health of the person. Okay? Those two areas, if you just look at them, you would have a reasonably good idea of how healthy a person is. And if you want to, you can look at it a little bit more carefully. Are they moody? What else? What would be another bad thing about a person? They're moody. Pardon? Green skin. Have you met someone with green skin? Okay. Are they moody? Such things as being excessively emotional. What else? Okay, that's certainly one thing. Okay. So you have a pretty good idea of who is healthy and who is not healthy. It's no big thing. You don't need to be a shrink to figure that one out. And I'm really serious about that. Most people, if we took, as a matter of fact, I won't do it, but if we did what is called a sociogram in here, we'd ask every one of you to name the least healthy person in the group. Okay? And let's say, for example, mention the most healthy person in the group. 90% of you would pick the same least healthy person in the group. Do you know that? You'd pick out someone, and there would be a 90% agreement on that. And the healthy one, not quite as much agreement, because you know that people are healthy, but you don't always know how healthy. And there isn't quite that much agreement. But people can pick out an unhealthy person very quickly. So that's really no problem. That, by the way, is something I'm a great believer in, and that is to ask your mom and dad and friends, what do you think about my future spouse? Honestly, what do you think about him or her? And if you have a lot of relatives and friends and mother and father who says, I don't think much of him or her, I would really be careful, quite careful. What other people think is important. They often have a pretty good idea. Particularly people who've been married for a while would have some idea. Okay. Low self-esteem, shyness, oversensitivity, these are all bad characteristics. The work and money area, this is the 11th point. It's very important that people can stick with a job for a period of time and get a regular income. So if a person can hang on to a job and stay gainfully employed, that's important. If you meet a fellow who's had a new job every 2 months, there is a very good indication that that is going to continue to the very end. Okay? Don't think that because you marry him, he is going to change. It just isn't that way. Also favorable is an agreement as to income and reasonable savings by both members. In other words, for example, if both agree that we want to save money and both agree on how to spend money, that's favorable. Favorable too is membership in certain occupational groups, such as social work, the professions, and the semi-professions. I was happy about hearing that about social workers. And I would imagine the same applies for Salvation Army officers. Now, I don't really know. Do we have some statistics of marital breakdowns among Salvation Army officers?
It would be obvious if you would have these statistics. I don't have them myself, but there have been some breakdowns among our officer ranks. That would be a very small percentage.
I would think so too, and I would think that they would be much lower than the normal population out there. Yes. Okay. So unfavorable is a disinclination or inability to hold a regular job or secure a dependable source of income. That simply is unfavorable. A 12th area is the in-law relationship area. It's favorable if both partners be like both sets of in-laws. Okay? And it's also favorable if both sets of parents approve of the match. But let's look at the first one. A lot of young people think that when I marry my spouse, I just marry them. The fact of the matter is that you marry their whole family. Okay? You marry their whole family, lock, stock, and barrel. You're going to be coming to innumerable family get-togethers, and you'll have to relate to your mother-in-law and your father-in-law and the whole bit. And it is therefore very important that you like them. And if you really dislike your in-laws, then you really ought to consider whether you should marry this person. Also keep in mind, as I said before, that in all probability, your spouse-to-be will be very much like his father in another 20 years. And you might not be so crazy about that. Okay? And the values and attitude areas, the 13th, and we'll get through this quickly, it's favorable if the partners-to-be are in essential agreement on their feelings about the degree of personal freedom to which each is entitled and about the roles of men and women in marriage. Okay? So if they're in agreement in regards to marital roles, that's favorable. And that's what we were talking about this morning. Who does what? And this means that it is much better if you come from the same culture, because then you believe in the same things. It is also important that they agree in regards to friends, neatness in a home, in a way which money should be used, and equality between husband and wife in terms of power. That is, that both are involved in decision making. Okay, 14, the area of background and personality similarity. And rather than me rattling off all the facts here, let me just say this. There's, so to speak, two ideas about marriage. The old one was that the opposite attracts, okay? And then the new one is that similar people are the ones who get together and have good marriages. We now have done enough research and we know that it is the similar kinds of people who should get together and they have good marriages. The more alike you are to your spouse, the better of a marriage you have. Now, there's always going to be sufficient differences to keep you happy and occupied and hopping and problem solving. But the more alike you are, the better. So, for example, if you're going out as a Salvation Army officer, you're going to be an officer, and you're going to stay in the Army, then in a sense, the only thing to do is to marry another Salvation Army officer who wants to be an Army officer, who believes the same thing as you, and who is very similar in most respects. That makes for a happy marriage. Okay? So the more similar, the better it is. Now, those are the facts, and maybe in some sense they're a little bit boring, but those are 14 facts that we, so to speak, know about. They're backed up with research, and it's information that you should know and should consider if you're looking at a spouse. Now, in addition to that fact, as I said before, the process through which you go is that you say, Lord, I want to be married. Please help me to find a spouse. In other words, through prayer. And then through the process of obedience, that is, you obediently follow the Lord's commands and do what the Spirit tells you to do. And then thirdly, you get the appropriate information. And fourthly, you use your head, you think, carefully, and fifthly, you take your time. Don't rush. And if you do that, you're going to make a reasonably good job of picking a partner. Now, as we'll talk about in the afternoon, being married is not the end-all and be-all of life. A lot of people who did not get married and have lived beautiful lives. There are all kinds of scriptural examples of that, and I have personal friends like that. They've lived terrific lives. So not everyone is called to be married, and there is not always opportunity for people to be married. And that's okay too. And the Lord knows about that, and maybe that is the life that is laid out for you, and that's not the end of the world. As Socrates said, whether you marry or don't marry, you are going to repent of it. Okay. Do you have any questions in regards to this whole business of marriage prediction? Yeah. Well, good reasons for being married is that you were brought up in a happy home where father and mother really love one another in a very mature manner, in the sense that they wanted to nurture and protect one another, etc. And you want to set up a similar kind of home for yourself. Those, I would think, would be good reasons for wanting to get married.
Somebody asked to get married, but you really couldn't see any good reason for getting married. What I'm asking, is there anything saying that these are good reasons to get married?
Well, one reason that maybe I should have mentioned is that we have certain needs, sexual needs for closeness and intimacy, for being touched, etc. And marriage generally is the most ideal place of having these needs met. But it's not the only place. Sexually, it would be for the Christian, but needs for closeness and intimacy we can have met through friends. Okay.
I was wondering over again, he or she has undesirable traits. It's going to have a feeling, well, when we're married, we will make them over and we will. But also in a Christian context, we have the question of what Jesus can do for an individual too. Now, to what extent, I know this is valid from a Christian standpoint, but would we be living in a fool's paradise to think in these terms that not only what I'm going to do for my intended spouse, but what I know Jesus can do?
Well, I would think that would be a very risky basis upon which to get married on. In other words, you cannot start out a marriage with the notion that I am going to straighten my spouse out. That is a rotten way of starting any marriage. Either you like him or her the way they are, or don't marry them. But don't have your own kind of a missionary outfit that you're going to straighten someone out. That's a terrible setup. And it's really unfair to the other person. You should love them and accept them for what they are, and tell them so, and then marry them, but don't try to straighten them out. As a matter of fact, there is scriptural evidence for this. In scriptures, Paul and Peter speaks in regards to Christian individuals who are married to non-Christians, and they are forever preaching and preaching and preaching to the other people. And the admonition is, don't preach. Show them by your new life, by your growth, by your Christian living, that it is really worthwhile to be a Christian. People who are trying to convert their spouses are they're really doing the wrong thing as far as I'm concerned. Don't try to convert them. Show them by your life what a real Christian is like, and how wonderful it is to be a Christian. Show them by your humility, by your ability to get along with people, etc. and then there is a good chance that they will get saved. But preaching at them and being obnoxious is not the way to go. That's for sure. Of course, Jesus changes people. There's no question about that. But we have no guarantee that your particular spouse is going to actually go along with Christ and be changed. They may want to resist all the time. So I don't think that's any guarantee in a marriage. And insofar as that is concerned, my approach is to say to spouses, look, you look after your own spiritual life first. Make sure that you are in good spiritual health and grow and develop. And then secondly, you work together as a family. But you really have to work on yourself first. The rule is always, don't work on someone else's problem. It's ridiculous. People come in and see me and they say, I got all kinds of problems. Okay, what's your problem? Well, my problem is my mother-in-law. Then I say to them, look, if you want to deal with the mother-in-law issue, then we need to bring mother-in-law in here and see whether she wants to be straightened out. If that can't be done, the only thing we can do is to work on your problem with mother-in-law, and do you want to do that? And very often they say, no, I want you to straighten mother-in-law out. And then I say, well, that's it then. We can't do anything. The Christian approach is that I want to work on my problems. In other words, if I have problems with mother-in-law, I work on my problem with mother-in-law. When she bosses me around, I get angry. Okay, what am I going to do about that? It's my problem as well as mother-in-law's problem. And so, that's the Christian thing. We start with ourselves first. Only way to do.